Hi, I'm Dr. Joseph Rios, and I'm going to talk to you about fraternity and sorority life. Your professor and I have known each other for a number of years, so I'm actually very proud that he's asked me to give you some of my perspective on working with fraternity and sororities and kind of the trends of what's going on and what you need to know about the differences between different fraternities and sororities. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I've worked in student affairs for about 20 years. I was an executive director of an NIC fraternity for 4 years and worked with the executive board as a volunteer for about 4 to 5 years before that. In my time working in student affairs, I have advised staff that have managed fraternities and sororities. I have worked directly with fraternities and sororities in my time in multicultural affairs. I've spent a lot of my time with Greeks and working on campus that didn't have a fraternity and sorority population and have seen the differences between the two types of communities. So let's just jump in a little bit and define these organizations. Fraternity and sororities are single gender organizations that are actually protected by current Title IX policies that allow for single gender organizations to exist on college campuses. In the news, you may have heard about some colleges and universities like Harvard that have decided to ban single gender and single sex organizations from existing or will penalize the students that are involved in those organizations. I can tell you from experience that there is a benefit when people are able to talk amongst themselves about issues that are relative to their own growth as people in ways that isn't satisfied by mixed organizations. So, regardless of the politics of the colleges that are engaging in these practices, we have a lot of data that suggests that these organizations do support the growth of our fraternity and sorority men and women. And I would definitely encourage you to stay abreast of what's happening at Harvard because as our nation's preeminent institution of education, what happens there may trickle down to other places. So make sure you're following that. When we think of fraternity and sororities too, we may have just an idea of like one type of fraternity or one type of sorority based on our own educational background. Some of us didn't go to urban institutions where people didn't have fraternity houses, or we may have gone to predominantly white colleges and universities that didn't have a lot of ethnic diversity or multicultural diversity that would drive different types of fraternity and sororities to exist. But currently, there are 5 national conferences and councils that either govern or advise and kind of work as a trade organization for different types of fraternity and sororities. So I worked with the NIC fraternity. That's the North American Interfraternity Conference. And those were 66 different organizations that work closely together as a trade organization and create some rules for the IFCs on college campuses to govern fraternity life on those campuses. There are 26 NPC, or National Panhellenic Conference sororities. They have a lot more oversight over the governance of their councils and how their members are recruited fairly across all the organizations on a given college campus. There are 9 historically black National Panhellenic Council fraternity and sororities. These were created at the start of the 1900s through the 1960s, and as the Divine Nine, as they're kind of known, they work predominantly and recruit and celebrate African American history and African American student leadership. So Typically, their members are African American, but they do include everybody in their organizations. There are 16 uh, NALFO chapters, fraternity and sororities, and NALFO is the National Association of Latino Fraternal Organizations. So those are very similar and parallel to the NPHC groups, but focus on the Latino experience. There are 18 NAPA, or National Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Desi American fraternities and sororities. Um, those organizations are thriving right now, and on your campuses that you may have come from, you may have seen some of these chapters kind of just pop up based on interest, because there are fraternities now and sororities that meet their cultural backgrounds that we're really excited about. And there are 11 National Multicultural Greek Council chapters. Those tend to be truly a multicultural experience and don't necessarily focus on any one ethnic or cultural background, but celebrate cultural differences among their members and on their respective college campuses. So I think when you start thinking about fraternity and sorority life, wherever you end up working at a college, is to really make sure that you're not thinking about fraternity and sororities as maybe these predominantly white stereotypes, or they're really not stereotypes. There's a lot of them. There's 66 NIC chapters and 26 NPC chapters. They recruit hundreds of members a year. Oh, and here's some things to know about fraternity or sorority life. They recruit thousands of students every year. They raise money in the millions. They do community service hours in the millions. And their cultural and monetary impact on their communities is really high. So, regardless of what we think about maybe how fraternity and sororities operate, their impact is felt. And so I think that when we work with fraternity and sorority students, to only think of them in terms of their stereotypes is limiting to them and actually creates a lot of barriers to communicating with them. That being said, I actually did my dissertation on fraternity hazing training for Greek advisors, and the research tells us that hazing happens, and happens often, and very rarely are outsiders able to see it because the organizations do a really great job of hiding it. So I think it would be really important for you, and regardless of whatever role you end up working on your college campus, to really become an insider with your Greek community. Because the more insider experiences you have, the better it is for you to kind of glean what's actually happening in your organizations that maybe they're not able to talk to someone they don't trust. And in trusting relationships, people usually disclose what's going on. I found that in my experience, I was not a member of a fraternity as an undergraduate, but was recruited after serving as a faculty advisor to my fraternity. And even as an outsider, just as the faculty advisor, I wasn't invited to certain events. I didn't get invited to some of the rituals that kind of defined the fraternity. But once I was initiated, all those walls came down, and I was invited to everything, not just with my fraternity, but with the sororities that were also active on campus and all the other fraternities, because once they saw me as a Greek, my perceptions may have changed. But they didn't change. I was still the same student affairs professional that I was before. I just now had more information. And I think as someone who's been both an insider and an outsider, I can tell you that the best way to get connected to the Greek students on your campus is to create a trusting relationship with just a handful of them. And you'll get invited to events that they don't invite other people to, in the hopes that you'll help change perception. I think that that's really important. One of the questions that your professors asked me to answer is, what are some trends that are going on right now? Other than the issues that are happening at Harvard, it's kind of hard to summarize uh, the entire trends that are happening across the country. But what I can tell you is that you can actually learn and read up on what's happening in Greek life on your own through the AFA website. So the AFA is the Professional Association for Fraternity and Sorority campus-based professionals. So fraternity and sorority advisors or assistant directors or whatever the title is. They produce a free publication called Perspectives that you can actually read without a membership to AFA. So they also have some other journals that you do need a membership to subscribe to, but Perspectives is produced frequently and actually covers some of the ongoing hot topics for all of Greek life, not just NIC or NPC sororities, fraternities. Something that I think really helps any person that wants to work with Greeks is to begin learning the lingo, because again, they're not this monolithic group of students that want to be treated the same. They actually want to be treated individually with respect to their Greek culture. So what's the difference between recruitment versus intake? Recruitment is how NIC and NPC organizations tend to bring in new members. We're going to look at the largest pool and narrow it down based on interest and mutual agreement. An intake model is more individual, and students have to self-select for an organization and show interest in that organization. And so membership classes tend to be smaller. So if you were to compare an NIC fraternity in the South, which may have a new member class of, let's say, 75 men, versus an NPHC sorority, which may have a new member class of 3 on the same campus. It's just a different style and different philosophy of recruitment. And I think when you start validating how their recruitment processes operate, you learn a lot more about the organizations. NIC and NPC fraternity sororities have alumni and alumni involvement, but NPHC chapters have even stronger graduate student members that kind of govern the direction of the chapter. So sometimes our undergraduate members may only be managing the undergraduate programming, but they're not managing the whole chapter. Community service versus philanthropy. Obviously, service is direct and human. It's human driven. Like, it's definitely about like showing up and being present and working with a group of people to collaboratively solve problems. Philanthropy is raising dollars in any way that's possible. And while there's a benefit to both in terms of programming and the skills you get from planning these events that impact communities, it is not the same to ask people to demonstrate how much money they're raising when they're putting in human capital, which when translated into human dollars has an equal amount of impact. And so make sure you're talking to your students about which way kind of best fits their philosophy, the number of members that they have, and how much time that they have to commit. And one thing I think is really important is as we think about gendered language, when we talk about Greek letter-based organizations, that we're not just using this this alumni term to kind of talk about all of our members that have graduated, but we're also making sure that we're understanding that this is a Greek term. So that is the male version of someone who's graduated, and that there's a female term to use to show some respect. And so it's alumni and alumnae, and when it's mixed gender, it's alumni, but you may just want to say people who've graduated to make sure that you're being the most inclusive as possible for people that maybe don't subscribe or have a gender identity. I think in closing, I think what's going to be more important for all of you to kind of learn when you're working with the Greeks on your campus is to begin to ask critical questions about how their new members are learning about the institutions, not just during their new member process, and making sure you're seeing leadership after they're initiated, and begin challenging them to ask how are they taking some of these skills that they've learned in the new member process and putting it back into leadership roles at your institution. And I think once you begin challenging your Greek students to do that, you may find there's more connection and involvement at your college. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you all do well in your classes. Thank you for your time.